Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here, and hopefully more people will join as the other sessions close. And my name is Mattia Vianello. I'm head of energy with Practical Action. We are a global organization working, linking up energy needs, agricultural needs of communities in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, Latin America, with the markets and with the government. So try to bring all together. And yeah, this session for us is very important. We have heard a lot about those big plans, ambitions to bring energy to all, through even green hydrogen in the previous session. And in this session, we are looking at, those over 600 million people who are, living in extreme poverty, below $2.15 a day, who are really struggling to access even the minimum levels of energy. And we're looking at, and those are the ones who are really risking to stay out of this race to 2030. And of course, they're across the globe, the majority in Sub-Saharan Africa. But they're the left behind, and we are going to look at some of the results of a study is forthcoming. We are producing for the Transforming Energy Access Program, which is funded by the FCDO, looking at the relationship between energy and extreme poverty, and what market mechanisms, in sense of business models and financial interventions like subsidies, for example, come together to face the affordability gap, which is the #1 challenge, but we will see it's not the only challenge. And we have a great panel. I'll introduce them in a couple of minutes, representing both organizations that work in the humanitarian sector, in displacement, but also we have a colleague joining us. I can see they are brave, joining us from Malawi, and he will represent a company selling products to last mile poor communities in Malawi. But first, just to get our brains going, just a quick poll in the room, just to get a bit where you are with the sort of your thinking about extreme poverty. So, sorry, the question is, where are the most extreme people living in extreme poverty are? Rural areas, informal urban settings, or in displacement. And, sorry, I'm not sure what happened here, but if you could tell me what you think, if you can raise your hand, if you think it's in rural areas, please. If you think it's in urban informal settings, raise your hand. If you think it's in displacement, please raise your hands. Well, surprise, it's in rural areas, obviously. I mean, that is because most of the people, living in Africa, especially Sub-Saharan Africa, are in rural areas, and that is where extreme poverty is. But we look at, of course, it doesn't mean that we don't need to face and try to work with people living in urban settlements or even in displacement settlements. And in this study, we saw a very close connection between lack of access to electricity and extreme poverty. The same relationship is much weaker when we look at clean cooking. That is mostly because even not extreme poor people have less access of clean cooking. So clean cooking is a much bigger issue even beyond extreme poverty, when we look at like poor or even low-income communities in some of those countries. And when we look at displacement, even if the majority of displaced people live through communities, and a small proportion of them living in camps, but a lot of them in Sub-Saharan Africa camps, we see that over 80% don't have access to electricity, over 90% don't have access to clean cooking. And the issue is not just the cost, and the access to market mechanisms, because there start to be mechanisms like, I mentioned before, subsidies. There will be a session, I think, at 12 about talking specifically into subsidies, consumer demand for subsidies. There are business models like pay-as-you-go that really manage to tackle some of those challenges. But there is a big, what we discovered, that there is a big evidence gap about the barriers of reach to those mechanisms. Those mechanisms tend to be designed in a way which tackle the financial challenges, but they don't look much at the issues, such as the fact that refugees don't have paper, so they don't have credit history to access a loan, or the simple fact that people living in rural areas might be very remote and they don't have the options of products there at their place. So some of the most significant, we did the modeling of this, and some of the most significant and potential for market mechanism combination is really looking at things like consumer concessional finance to reduce interest rates of products, like Ray will talk about their model as energy as a service, but really to bring down those costs and spread the cost as much as possible, because the upfront cost and seasonality of incomes have a big effect on how people can afford. So if you bring down the interest rates and you spread the cost across a long time, that's the way to do it. But there are still very few examples of making this a large scale. I will stop here. I think a lot of more interesting findings will come out, including some modeling, end of November with this study, looking at market mechanisms for the extreme poor in energy access. But I think we'll start a deep dive with our panelists. So let me introduce, we have Bertil Kimpiller from Practical Action. She's been with us working in camps in Rwanda for over 6 years. So she will bring a direct experience about what's the experience of refugees in Rwanda accessing energy access, purchasing it, and looking at how market companies are coming there. We have Megan from the GPA. She will tell us a bit some of the research has been doing, looking at East Africa and the wider energy access issues with displacement settings. We have Brave online. Hi, Brave, can you hear us? Yes. Let's see if you can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you very well, thank you.
We can hear you very well.
Me?
He will talk us about their model with energy as a service for the extreme poor people in Malawi. And then we have Mariam, who represents UNIDO in Iran, and will talk us about how they're building energy infrastructure to create jobs in Afghan refugee camps in Iran. So yeah, a good panel. And I will start from looking really from what's the experience of like in those camps and how those people experience really their accessing energy, purchasing energy, and what are their challenges. Bertil, please.
Thank you, Mattia. As they said, I'm called Bertil, and I'm really happy to be here. And thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I will start by sharing the experience in the camp. And I believe most of you are not aware about how the camp looks like. So the camps, it's like a small village where people live together, and they share communal infrastructure like latrines, and kids go to school as normal in the host community, and toddlers, they start in the camp because we have schools in the camp. So with the renewable energy for refugees, we are able to support refugees to get access to clean and affordable electricity by using the solar home system. So far, around 5,000 plus, we are able to have a solar home system. We use what we call the market-based approach. It was not easy in the camp because in the refugee camp, there is free distribution. By telling a refugee that you will be able to buy the solar home system, it was no-go. You can imagine the challenges we faced. But through awareness campaign, trying to subsidize the product, we are able to show that it's possible. We are sharing our learnings with humanitarian agents and private sector. We also we used revolving fund as one approach to empower refugees to do the small businesses. Normally in the refugee camp, there is a high percentage of youth. And the youth, they are just sitting, doing nothing because there's no much opportunity. Refugees, they don't own land. And women, they have burden to go outside to collect the firewood. Now we are working with GIZ to see how we can support the most vulnerable people through ENDEV project, which is really going well. And I want also to mention that through renewable energy for refugees, we are able to install power street lights to communal areas like latrine, markets, so that refugees can sell and exchange product, which was quite successful because all those street lights are really working well. Under productive use of energy, as I mentioned, we have a high population of the youth in the camp. So under productive use of energy, we are training refugees through mentorship, and they are able to acquire electrical appliances. I will close my speech saying that energy really matters, but you can imagine how can a refugee be able to buy a solar home system when they don't own papers? It's really hard to access a loan because they don't owe papers, and they can't have collateral. So it's quite really challenging, and yeah, I would really encourage everyone to come and to see how we can continue support the refugee.
Thanks, Bertil. And just to, sorry, I forgot to put some context into this. This is a program which has just finished the first phase, where about 60,000 refugees got access by purchasing actually products, cook stoves and systems. And maybe after we'll ask you about to hear a bit. It would be good to hear a bit more about how the private companies came in, what incentivized them to come in, and how that worked, because that has been really the challenge. And this is now starting a new phase, which is in all 5 refugee camps. Those are Congolese refugees in Rwanda, and is targeting 100,000 refugees about in the next 3-4 years in Rwanda. The project is implemented practical action in partnership with UNHCR, and then there is this new component also with NDEV, which is in discussion, looking at RBF and subsidies. So it's an interesting project, and thanks, Bertil, but we'll go back into to hear more about the market players, how they came in. But maybe we move on to Megan. And just because Megan, as I say, she works for the Global Platform for Action, now she'll tell us what is that about. And she brings a perspective which is more global, or focus on East Africa from a recent study she did, looking at this interconnection between energy access, displacement, what has worked, what has not, and some of the learnings there. Please, Megan.
Thanks, Mattia, and hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. As Mattia mentioned, I work for the Global Platform for Action on Sustainable Energy and Displacement Settings, so I'm aware that might not be a name that's familiar for everyone. So essentially what we do, we're a coordination platform that brings together all the organizations working on humanitarian energy to foster knowledge exchange. We kind of see ourselves, we're not an implementer, I think is important to mention, but we see ourselves more as a think tank, as an advocacy body to really kind of put a face to the humanitarian energy sector and really kind of highlight all the issues that might be relevant within the energy access sector, but are even more kind of pronounced in displacement settings. So yeah, and the GPA I think is also, again, important to mention that while we're not implementers, we work very closely with practitioners and see our role as gaining access to information about what's working for the different approaches that organizations are piloting, particularly when it comes to market-based mechanisms. We're really interested in learning on what works and identifying ways to scale up and replicate that action elsewhere. So as Mattia said, we kind of look into local contexts and then zoom out to kind of see the global perspective and see what lessons we can draw from that, and then present these kind of opportunities to donors, which is another big group of stakeholders that we work with. If I may, just checking if you can see my slide. Oh, sorry, thank you. Ooh, I'm not sure how to navigate this. The green one, fantastic. The big button, excellent. So I hope you can, yes, you can see the 3 reports that I'm happy to introduce today that Mattia mentioned. So within the GPA, I work for a research program called READS, which stands for Roadmaps for Energy Access in Displacement Settings. And what we're doing with READS is essentially looking into 10 specific country contexts and identifying the key, kind of taking stock essentially, what is the energy access situation in displacement settings in these 10 countries. So trying to take stock of any work that's already happening, any approaches that have been working well, looking at who's working in the space, and then identifying specific project opportunities to further and enhance that work. So you can see that we have 3 reports so far, and they're all in East Africa, which has been the focus of our the first phase of the research program. But we are also looking into countries in the Middle East and other countries in sub-Saharan Africa in further phases. Just to give you a little snapshot of what's in these reports, so beyond kind of take like a state of the sector, kind of comprehensive like analysis of the different forms of energy access within the displacement context, I think some specific kind of tools, or maybe not tools, but like resources, I guess, that I think are helpful to highlight is our stakeholder directory. So we've compiled hopefully as comprehensive as a list as we can of any actors working in the humanitarian energy space in a given country context, categorizing them by stakeholders, so government, humanitarian development actors, private sector, financial institutions, and also any community-led enterprises, as there are a lot of refugee-led enterprises working in energy provision already. So that's the stakeholder directory, and then we also have a section of project concepts in which we identify, based on existing experiences of organizations piloting different approaches, we identify where is the potential to really build on that work and either replicate it in a different setting or scale it up essentially. I'd like to mention that these project concepts are not just the product of us authors of the reports, but instead were developed in workshops with in-person stakeholders, and are kind of the summary of those ideas. Mattia, would you like me to expand on some of the findings at this point?
We go for the second round. Maybe let's do this first round of introductions. Maybe let's move to Brave. Thank you, Megan. And I think we want to hear more about the findings from those studies. But Brave, and great that you could join us from Malawi, even remotely. It's good to have you here. And if you can tell us a bit your experience targeting some of the poor communities in rural Malawi with solar products, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mattia, and hello everyone in the room. I think Mattia has already depicted the level of problem in terms of energy access, especially in the poor countries like Malawi, which I know is not just Malawi, Sub-Saharan Africa we're talking about. So we've been in the sector for quite some time. We started our operation in 2008 in Malawi specifically. And the first step was to understand the market. Unfortunately, then we didn't have many people who really understood about solar technologies or renewable energy technologies. So we started market activations, working with schools and local authorities to really train people on clean renewable energy in general. Of course, fast forward, now the market has developed and we've seen so many companies coming in, technologies are there, but still more we are not reaching everyone with clean renewable energy. And which has come out very clearly to our attention is those that are left behind are people who are in extreme poverty. And the conventional business models are not necessarily looking at this market because it's too risky and it doesn't make business case. So if we are to reach these people and really talk about universal energy access, we need also to break boundaries of business modeling processes and also some interventions in reaching out to the poorest customers. So this is the area where my organization, that's Solar Aid, and Sunny Money, we've been focusing on how can we really push and achieve universal energy access. In Malawi specifically, of course, might be the case in other countries as well. We picked 3 key areas that were contributing to energy poverty, especially amongst the poorest customers and in rural markets. One is lack of having stable access points in those rural markets, because conventional business models are looking more into driving sales as well as maximizing revenues and mitigating against some risks. Therefore, it becomes very difficult to stabilize and establish sustainable access points in the remote areas. So that became one of the areas that we focused on how can we develop energy hubs in the rural areas. Secondly is access to financing. If we're talking about universal energy access and leaving no one behind, we need also to increase the participation of local players in developing solutions and delivering those solutions in those rural markets. That was very low, and we tried to create some models where we involve the local entrepreneurs themselves strongly. Thirdly is access to affordable financing to support these local entrepreneurs who have taken that bold step to invest in these rural markets. So this is the area where we have developed a microfinance tailored for small local entrepreneurs to help with their working capital and then increase their delivery in these rural markets. And finally is continuously pressing on the business model innovation. And this is where now we've developed what we call energy as a service. Learning from selling products ourselves over a long period of time, and we've been tracking as well as measuring consumer behavior. And what we learned is that customers in the rural areas who manage to buy pay-as-you-go products from us, they struggle to commit to those monthly payments. But they were making tiny weekly payments, which demonstrated that they were very much happy with energy as a service. So that's where we are at the moment, and we're developing this model with an intention for either government adoption or commercial adoption for scale.
Great, thanks, Brave. And thank you very much for the overall picture. I think after we want to dig a bit deeper into the energy as a service model, because I think it's something, you know, which the sector can learn a lot about, and so it's interesting, and we want to hear about. Let's close the round of first round, and please also, I ask the audience, if you have questions, keep them for now. We'll have a round, try to keep 10-15 minutes at the end for conversation with our panelists and you, if you are interested. And so Mariam, you know, spotlight on you now and the work you are doing in Iran. Sorry, there is the remote, if you want to move.
Thank you very much, Mattia.
Floor is
Hello,
yours.
everyone. My name is Mariam Jabansharaki, and I'm the head of UNIDO country office in Iran. So today I'm here joining the colleagues in this panel to share with you some lessons that we had learned in 5 refugee settlements in Iran. But before that, I want to start with one important reminding to myself and all of us that while we all are talking about refugees as a general term, we are talking about a community that have a lot of differences, like all of the human communities. So this is the key point for any kind of interventions for refugees or other displaced, poor, or less privileged communities, to understand their differences, their needs, their values, which will help us to customize a very productive work plan and an intervention for these communities. With that, I want to just give you some information about the 3 years project that UNIDO is currently implementing in Iran for 18,000 Afghan refugees in 5 different refugee settlements. This is not my slide.
You need to, yeah.
Okay. 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 So Iran, you may know that is one of the biggest, is hosting one of the biggest community of refugees in the world. According to the UNHCR, there are 8 million Afghan, Iraqi, and Syrian refugees in Iran, including refugees who are legally registered or illegally entered the country from the southern borders of Iran, or those who are residing in the camps or outside of the camps. Our intervention in UNIDO is covering 18,000 of these refugees who are the less privileged and are residing in 5 different settlements in the country. One important part of our experience in this project, I prefer to share with you the lesson learned in the second round of this panel, but in this part, I want to let you know that developing a project for refugees like other communities needs involvement in different levels of negotiating with the donors, negotiating with the government that normally have some territorial or security considerations, dealing with a counterpart that is not necessarily a technical counterpart, because as you know, Ministry of Interiors or Homeland Securities are normally the counterpart, the national counterpart in different countries. So we have a range of different players, counterparts, focal points. Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course, is a very important player. And then we all are working in a team with the support of UNIDO Technical Department and Energy System Division to come up with a work plan for the beneficiaries who are refugees. And that's just another level that the key differences and challenges and advantages should be also seen. So in this intervention, we were invited by the government of Iran as a specialized agency that has technical expertise to intervene in an area, which is the refugee area, as a member of solution strategy for Afghan refugees. And this is a global response platform for all of the UN or international agencies who are working for refugees, including UNHCR, WFP, NRC, or other international organization. So with that, we started raising and mobilizing funding from our member states or bilateral donors who were interested to allocate funding. And government of Republic of Korea, South Korea, funded the first project in Iran. What we okay. The work plan we developed in the country was based on the needs and capacity of these refugees. Okay, I'm horrible in the slides. Okay, so my colleagues in our team, they developed based on the needs and based on the age and different, the feasibility study that we developed in the first phase of this project, the inception phase. They proposed 4 different applications for Afghan refugees in these settlements. One of them was solar and PV intervention for providing clean energy and electricity for refugees. The other one was establishing smart greenhouses, which were also developed by the solar PV panel for the energy systems, managing the waste in a sound and environmental way, so through the vermicomposting application. And the last one was providing water resources and managing the wastewater in each of these settlements. Aside from these technical applications, we also conducted about 69 different so these are the different applications, including establishing water purification, greenhouse in these settlements, and also PV and solar panel. Okay. So aside from that, we also conducted 39 different training workshops, technical trainings for these refugees with focus on female youth and refugees with physical disability that normally are not taken into consideration in some of the interventions in the settlements or these camps. The feedback when we started proposing the technical trainings.
Can you keep the feedback for the next round? So
Absolutely.
we go in the learning now. So we have some time to go a bit in the depth.
Yes.
Also because you mentioned people with disabilities, and this actually, I just wanted to make a point. This study we are doing now will be launched in November. Is also looking within the correlation between energy and extreme poverty at subgroups, including people with disabilities. And actually, there is a lot of evidence that came out around that, and other groups like older, the younger, women, and clearly the biggest group of people who are really lacking energy are the ones in fragile and the conflict-affected locations, and this is the biggest group of everyone of people with lacking access to energy, and presents huge challenges in terms of security for companies and others to access, and is very much overseen by a lot of the groups. So in a way here we have like 3 out of 4 panelists talking about energy for refugees, but I think that is symptomatic of the fact that, I mean, although this is great and this is an advancement that the sector has done, especially the humanitarian sector, to look at energy as a key enabling factor for the humanitarian assistance and also bringing markets and looking energy in a different way, it also shows that that works because it's organized. There are agencies which are taking care of those groups of people, while the extreme poor living in all those areas, in rural areas especially, are really left behind. And more focus needs to be put on them, even if there is not like an agency which is specifically looking at them. Just a point that, which I think it's important we all think about when we have those conversations. But even for us, a practical action, or when we look at this, our best case is from the humanitarian energy rather than working with extreme poor in rural areas. But so going back maybe to Bertil, and thanks to the panelists for this first round of introductions. Bertil, can you tell us a bit more about what were the challenges and what worked to bring in market players, sellers of cook stoves, solar home systems in the 5 camps, actually the initial 3 camps in Rwanda where you're working, and in the future in all the camps?
The main challenge was ability to pay, because as you know, majority of the refugees, they don't have permanent job or part-time job. That's where we working with private sector, market actors, sharing them data that at least if we can do the risking, if we can do awareness, or they can come and sell the product. So with awareness creation and developing market-based approach, especially for the refugees. For instance, if I give you a typical example, one stove is cost around 40 USD. So we inform private sector, we can subsidize the stove, and we know pretty sure that a refugee can be able to pay. So by sharing data, information was able to show that a market-based approach was able to work in the refugee camp.
And just, sorry, follow-up question on the stoves, because I know those some of the stoves with the pellets, right?
Yes.
How did we incentivize the companies to actually come to the camps and sell? I mean, there was some financial support. How did we incentivize them to come to a place where they thought they had no market?
Depending on the need of each company, because we didn't want a monopoly, so we interested all companies. There is one company who said, if you can help me to construct a factory which can produce more pallets, that will be nice. So basically what we did the risking for their businesses, but also we informed them it was really necessary to come and set shops in the camp, because that's how possible the market was going to work in the camp.
Great, thanks, Bertil. And maybe we shift to Megan, because Megan explored the similar situation, I think, in camps in Rwanda, Uganda, and Kenya. And so what are your sort of key learnings from that you want to share around this, really, how markets have came into this displacement settings?
Exactly, and actually RE4R was one of the projects we had the pleasure of working together with to produce one of the reports, and also learned more about that specific context. And I think there are a lot of really interesting findings coming from Rwanda, but also, as said, in different refugee settlements and camps in Kenya. But maybe just quickly to zoom out and go to the question, so why market-based mechanisms in displacement settings? I think they're already hard to do in any rural communities, but then in displacement settings there's potentially even more barriers. Just to bear in mind that a lot of the displacement settings that we work in most of them are protracted, and a stat that I sometimes find helpful to remember is that most refugee settings, I think this was a couple of years ago, it might have even increased, they last for an average of 17 years. So we're not talking about temporary settlements, we're talking about villages, we're talking about places that are honestly probably there to stay and have, for generations of people are living there. At the same time, because they're considered temporary, because they're officially refugee settlements, they don't get the same amount of long-term investment, and there's no, there's just a very heavy reliance on aid, even for these really long, protracted situations. So I think where market-based mechanisms come in is that they try and shift that reliance on aid and instead see the opportunity of an influx of people to create, and a high concentration of people, and often very skilled and diverse people, to create markets in those settings in areas of the country that might already have been disadvantaged. But crucially, host communities are often not, or do not receive aid the way refugees do, but by working with market-based mechanisms, there's an opportunity to foster local ecosystems and market systems in refugee hosting areas of the country. And also another point about relying on aid is there's little choice involved for recipients of aid, but by bringing in different private companies and fostering a market, that's when people can also choose products that are of higher quality and that actually meet their needs. So that's kind of the rationale, I guess, behind market mechanisms. And yeah, looking into different market-based approaches that we've seen in the different East African contexts, I think, as Maria mentioned, it's important to remember these contexts are all very different, so there's never any one-size-fits-all, but maybe just a couple of kind of findings that have rang true in all the different settings. I think it's important to remember that subsidies are going to remain necessary for what is not just the foreseeable future, but like we are talking about people with pretty low ability to pay. But that doesn't mean that there's not a chance to actually create market structures using the help of subsidies. And again, experiences like from the RE4R project, and also I see a lot of NDEV colleagues here, from their pilots with de-risking mechanisms, result-based financing, and end-user subsidies. I think we see that there is a lot of potential to make a real difference for these companies and customers, both working on the supply side with the companies to help them set up operational structures, but also working directly with end users to make it more affordable. I think something that we've seen, particularly with like de-risking mechanisms or supply side subsidies, is that it's really important. There's different ways of doing subsidies, and instead of just focusing on sales targets, for example, it's really important to have like longer-term oriented goals. Things like, as Bertil mentioned, setting up an actual physical shop in the camps or the settlements makes a huge difference in terms of customer like awareness and trust in the company and brands. Things like looking into storage and warehousing facilities. And crucially also training and hiring local sales agents is, I think, a really important way of kind of creating longevity and also allowing a company to keep operating in the longer term. And then on the demand side, I think there's also a lot of important lessons to learn in terms of there's different ways of doing them in terms of, I think, for example, instead of just ending them very suddenly, having a gradual phase out. Or some organizations have tried things like having like a sale in terms of the products being available at a subsidized price and then not. But I think it's important to remember sometimes if you just use a subsidy and then stop offering it, that can have a quite disruptive effect too, and a lot of people, that can actually reduce people's willingness to pay. So that's kind of the whole topic around subsidies. I think one or two more points, I guess, around things that we've seen in the context that's been really important is working with the local community. And that, again, as mentioned, is about training and hiring people to really work for these companies. And again, not just refugees, but host community members as well. And to really just kind of create a sense of ownership of the products. In the RE4R project, maybe Bertil will mention setting up streetlight boards to manage and maintain the system, so remembering operations and maintenance. And again, just also remembering that refugee contexts are really diverse, and you often have a lot of very skilled people. So one example that leads to my last point would be around, I think, government permitting. I think that's something that you have to remember in refugee camps and settlements. Is a big complexity to navigate for the private sector, and I think that's where development actors have a really big role to play in terms of supporting them with the whole government permitting. And I think you can see that once there have been private companies that have managed to kind of trailblaze and establish themselves, it becomes a lot easier. But there's a cool example, I think you might have all heard of, there's a mini grid that was established by Renuvia in Kakuma refugee camp, and it's actually one of the largest mini grids in East Africa. It's 540 kilowatt peak currently, and is actually being expanded. And that is in a refugee camp/settlement. And again, I think they played a huge role in terms of like bringing like the private sector into those settings. And what's really nice to see is that they're now working with refugee-led mini-grid operators to join forces and to expand their services too, and standardize tariffs and really create a much larger network reaching many more customers, which is amazing to see how a lot of the synergies of working with a large international company, and then working with refugee-led enterprises who have that intricate knowledge of the local context, how there's a lot of, again, synergies that can be leveraged through those kind of partnerships. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Megan. Really, yeah, great insights from your study. And also thanks for zooming out or reminding us why we're talking about market-based approaches, and also why market-based approaches doesn't mean just having market players selling products at full cost, but it also means having financial external interventions, like whether it's a subsidy, grant, or other things to really make those affordable, to overcome those affordability barriers, but also to overcome the rich barriers to those mechanisms. The fact that they might not have papers to access a loan, or the fact that those products are too far away and you need a last mile distributor to get there. I'm curious to hear from Brave. I mean, Brave, you're hearing all the stories from from those displacement settings. I'm wondering how much you think this applies to the settings you are working, like extreme poor in rural Malawi, but also, I mean, just using that as to bridge, to hear a bit more the details about your energy as a service project, because I think that is it's really interesting, and I think that might work even in refugee settings, but also more widely in other areas in Malawi and in Africa, really. So getting a bit more details on that would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mattia. Actually, listening to Megan, I was thinking, did we even see the paper that she has produced to inform our business model? Because those are some of the building blocks that we have used to set up energy as a service. Maybe I'll give a little bit of a context how we ended up with this model. What's the story behind it? So we are also like a normal pay-as-you-go solar company. We do sell products on pay-as-you-go. Of course, we have been trying to stretch the payment plans to make sure that we reach very poor customers, but it has proven to be very difficult to actually achieve it and make it sustainable. So we focused a lot on understanding consumer behavior. Those that were struggling and defaulting, we didn't treat them as defaulters per se. We started kind of categorizing them as customers who are struggling to pay. And then for us, it was like a learning point to get a bit deeper to understand their behavior. Now we started tracking their payments since they started paying for their system. One thing that came out very clear was that they were making tiny payments more regularly, like twice a week or something like that, but they were still not able to accumulate that into a predefined figure that they were supposed to pay on a normal pay-as-you-go. So that gave us a bit of an insight that these customers who are actually defaulting, it's not that they don't want to have energy in their house, it's just because the terms that we're giving to them does not really match with their income levels. So it's better for them to make tiny payments of accessing energy rather than actually owning or paying for the asset. So that made us to shift our idea from selling solar home systems or like selling products to more of kind of like installing revenue generating assets. So these are being solar products. And we shifted the product from being kind of like a unit to sell and to rather our own assets, revenue generating assets. So we move them to a balance sheet. So in this case, for us, we are responsible for the system that we install in someone's house, maintaining it, making sure that it's working constantly, and the customer does not take any burden of the system. We take that, it says, on our books. So basically, that was the transition. It was based on consumer behavior, those customers who are struggling to afford pay-as-you-go. So that's how energy as a service came about. So we did a bit of what we call a test of the concept to prove that it could really work. And then we engaged the government, Ministry of Energy, through Malawi Rural Electrification Program. We got access to their master plan, which clearly stipulated which locations they were planning for grid extension, for mini grids, and which areas they deemed to be too poor for both mini grids and grid extension. And for us, that became our target. And we're calling this as a pre-electrification. So we know that in the next 10 years, these areas will not have any access to electricity at all. That was the first step. Then second step was to develop a model which is pro-poor, meaning reaching the poorest customer in the poorest region of the country. So we did a study of the whole districts in Malawi, and we picked the poorest district, the one which is least electrified. That was the second step. Third step was within this poorest district, we had to select the poorest community in that district. And that's when we came up with the allocation, and we deployed 500 systems initially to test the concept if it could actually work. In year one, we observed that customers were making payments comfortably, and looking at the profile of the customers against the customers who are accessing solar home systems, actually the ones that we were reaching, 97% of them were living and actually are living in under $1 a day, according to World Bank classification. So these are like really, really poor customers. But when we looked at our financials and all that, they were so stable, they were making payments. In year two, which is the current year, we thought of now stress testing the model to adding more systems, but maintaining the structures the same. So we have deployed 2,000 systems. Now we've got 2,500 homes connected in just one area. And the payment trends are still the same. We are maintaining stable.
Go ahead, Brave. We have a guest.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so basically that's what happened. So at the moment, we are in the second phase of stress testing the model. In terms of operations, one thing I've also found to be very, very useful is localizing operations. So we're working with the local leaders to identify trusted individuals in this location. We train them on customer service, installation, product knowledge, and they become the ones who are actually operating on the ground. And we are mostly remotely supporting them to make sure that they're providing proper and good quality service to the customers. Of course, all the cash management is being done centrally from our office, but in terms of the day-to-day operations, it's localized. So far, the responses are very positive, and we're looking at going to phase 3, where we want to electrify 100% of this population, and also start adding in productive use of energy as another business model.
Thanks, Brave. Thanks. And now we move on to Marian. Just one consideration. I mean, this makes me think. You know, I heard the essay a couple of times, both from the CEO of SU for All and from other people, about this ambition of like aspirational minimum of like 1,000 kilowatt-hour per person per year, which is, you know, it's very, you know, high target when we think about some of those populations, and where, you know, the struggle is to get to a tier 1, tier 2. So it's a philosophical question. It's an important one. I think the sector needs to think about and discuss. But we don't do this now. Mariam, please, if you want to finish your intervention giving some more insights about the learning about building livelihoods with energy, I would like to keep 5 minutes for, you know, some questions if there are. Please start elaborating them in your brain. Please, Mariam.
Thank you, Mattia. Yeah, sure. I think we can skip the details about the project document, because it is accessible in UNIDO portal, and if for those who are interested, you can see the project design and inception phase report, as well as our progress reports in each of the steering committee of the project. So I skipped that part, and I prefer to share with you 7 specific lessons learned that we had in that project. And it will be very valuable for us, because soon we are going to replicate the project with the same donor funding that was offered by the government of Korea. That we also take it as an achievement that a donor that is not a common donor for UNIDO or a technical agency is encouraged to reallocate the funding. So one of the key lessons learned that we had in this project after starting and doing the inception phase was that we are not alone in these settlements. We are a member of Global Response, and there are other organizations with different mandates and different, you know, type of interventions. Normally, humanitarian agencies like UNHCR, that is the leading agency for refugees, or WFP, have immediate interventions for providing refugees with food, with financial supports that should urgently be allocated as a support to refugees. So for us as a technical organization intervening in these settlements and offering mid-term or long-term infrastructural interventions, that was an important lesson, because you cannot establish a comprehensive technical, for example, waste management system if another organization is donating, for example, a waste management equipment that is not seen in your application. That was one of the important lessons learned that we also shared with the government, that if it is a global response, then we need to sit together and work together as a team, both developmental and humanitarian agencies. And to see our intervention as a value chain in an ecosystem, not as isolated intervention in each of these settlements. The second lesson we learned in Afghan settlements in Iran was that, as I said, every community for every different group of refugees or displaced people need to also consider the contextual barriers. To give you an example, in our greenhouse application, we developed a very smart and productive and well-designed greenhouse in 2 of these settlements. But after we were going to start planting the vegetables or the products in each of these greenhouses, we learned that because of the cultural barriers, female refugees cannot work together with male refugees in these greenhouses. So that was a cultural barrier that we had not seen at the first place when we were designing. So that's what we will consider in the next
sorry, the main sign we have to close in 4 minutes.
Yeah,
we also want to pick a couple of questions from the public, if there are. If you want to give your last final lesson, I don't think we can go through the whole
Okay, just the last one, which I think is very important, is that if we do not involve the host community, private sector, and also the host government, there will be no sustainable solution for refugees. Refugees cannot be integrated in the host community without benefiting the private sector. I stop here.
Thank you, Mariam, and I think great if you could put the link so everyone can go to see the details. I hope we have a couple of questions before we close, if there are. If you have any curiosity or interest in hearing more from one of the panelists. Yes, I can see Patrick from, just come here, please. Introduce yourself and ask the question.
Hi, Patrick from NDEV. My question is about the concept of ownership, because it came up, I think, here and there throughout the conversation, and maybe touching on the last point, if you interpret a distinction between the concept of ownership between refugee settlements and the host communities, just to elaborate on that a bit.
Sorry, ownership of products, services, whatsoever. Okay, who wants to take this? Bertil or Megan or Mariam? Who wants to pick it? Mariam, you had a chance to speak. Yeah.
So thank you very much. I think this is a very important question when it comes to the specific design of the project. In every country, I think there are different rules and regulations. So we need to also be mindful about the legal platforms that each country has for ownership or, for generating income for refugees. In our intervention in the country, we learned that there are a range of difficulties. For example, we generated income through the solar and PV panel, and we were going to sell the extra, part of these electricity to the government, to another governmental organization. And we learned that government cannot sell to another organization. So we had to find a private sector organization to mediate and to facilitate this transaction. That was the same for refugees' ownership of the, for example, income generated in these settlements from the vegetables or, products. So I think case by case, it is different, and it should be taken into consideration during the designing phase.
Thanks. Maybe just to hear from Brave, and then we close. Brave, the question of ownership, in this case, I guess, ownership of the systems with energy as a service, and the long term, just to hear from like a sort of extreme poor rural communities perspective in 30 seconds, and then we need to close.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, of course, it's a big question right now about maybe depriving people an opportunity to own an asset. But looking at the customers we're dealing with, they can't afford to buy an asset, but they need electricity. And also to take an example of how we pay for electricity ourselves. If you look at our homes, where we're coming from, we are paying for electricity to the utility company, and it owns all the cables, which brings electricity into our own homes. So it's kind of like we are forcing the poorest people to buy an asset that can generate electricity, where us living in the privileged communities, we don't own the actual infrastructure that brings electricity into our homes. So this is kind of like the argument that we're operating under. So we're trying simply to bring electricity at the time when they can't afford a system. There is that choice that they can also buy and own it. They take it off from our books.
Great, thanks, Brave. I think we have no time for a wrap up. I guess just one sentence is that clearly, each of those communities and groups needs very suited design, fit for them mechanism, and this needs to be taken into account by who builds those financial mechanisms, market, business models, and all the enabling environment around. I think we close it here. I want to thank the three panelists in person and Brave from Malawi. Thank you very much. Maybe a little applause from the public. And yeah, thanks for your... Yeah, thanks to the audience as well. Thank you.